We're back at war with Iran, if it ever really stopped in the first place. For the last 3 days, the U.S. has been striking targets inside the country and along the Iranian coast. The Secretary of Defense says we're going to target bridges and power plants, which under international law that we've agreed to, it'd be war crimes. The U.S. military has continued to strike non-enemy merchant ships in the Strait of Hermes, and maybe the biggest announcement from the White House about the war, we're going to be taking a crucial piece of Iranian territory, which likely means boots on the ground. An escalation in this war we were promised would never happen. And then, as soon as Trump promised that, the whole thing was off again. The ceasefire is dead. Long live the ceasefire, I guess. It's Thursday, June 11th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Hermes. I want to talk to you about sleep. Because if you've been following this show, you know the news cycle has been absolutely unhinged. And if the news cycle isn't going to be good to you, your sleep cycle should be. And that starts with the right fabric. And it's why this episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth. Here's the thing. Summer is here and it is hot. You're already lying awake at 2 a.m. thinking about the headlines, your deadlines, that weird thing you said at work. The last thing you need is to also be sweating through your sheets like you're having a fever dream. That is where Cozy Earth comes in. Bamboo sheets are legitimately temperature regulating, meaning they keep you cool when it's hot and warm when it's not. I know that sounds like marketing speak, but it is just how bamboo works. It breathes. Your polyester blend from 5 years ago, it does not breathe. It traps heat. It is not your friend. They also have bamboo pajamas, which make you wonder why you ever wore anything else to bed. And when I wake up, I put on their new brushed bamboo joggers that are soft in a way that feels almost unfair to the rest of my clothes. Look, the world is a lot right now, and you deserve one thing, at least, that just works. Cozy Earth is that thing. You can go to CozyEarth.com and use the code MIMS25 at checkout for 30% off. And just a heads up, when you use the code, Make It Make Sense gets a cut of that sale, which helps this show keep going. So you're sleeping better and you're supporting independent journalism, which is, what I call a win-win. Again, the code is MIMS25 at CozyEarth.com. All right, let's get back to the show. On Tuesday, I said that the president had confirmed that Iran had shot down a U.S. helicopter near the Iranian coast. Now, thankfully, those two pilots in the chopper were rescued. In response to that, the U.S. launched new airstrikes into Iran, and for the last 72 hours or so, the war has been back on. I know that seems dumb because it's not like the ceasefire here ever really held longer for maybe than like a week, if at all, given the fact that both sides have been running a military blockade in the Strait of Hermes, where 20% of the world's oil goes through. But up until this week, the White House's official position has been that the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran was still in place, and all those missile and drone launches and counterstrikes were just little love taps. That's literally what Trump called them. First and foremost, it has to be pointed out that this latest renewal of strikes in Iran by U.S. forces are happening without any kind of constitutional authority. The White House has not justified any legal reasoning for being able to carry out these strikes. They apparently have not been briefing members of Congress or the Senate about strikes, and Congress has not authorized any kind of military use of force, and certainly not a full-scale war. It would be hard for the administration to even claim this is being done under the War Powers Act because they told Congress the war was over and the operation was never officially ended anyway. Plain and simple, constitutional, military, and legal scholars agree widely that these strikes are outright illegal until Congress gives some kind of approval. But when pressed on whether Congress actually needs to do its job that is required in Article 1 of the Constitution, this is what Speaker of the House Mike Johnson said today.
Negotiation. And I think he's communicating directly with our adversaries over there. That I would not put too much stock in the details of that right now. In the middle of this important
Would you should Congress have a vote before he does that?
Got to take a photo here.
He just ran away for a photo op and didn't answer a question about maybe Congress's most important role. Now, the House did just pass a resolution to rein in the president's war powers, and the Senate passed its own a few weeks ago, but the one from the House has to go back to the Senate now, where its fate is unclear. But when Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, who recently voted against reining in the president's powers, was asked about this whole thing, he said he doesn't think the president should have to tell Congress about his war plans because Trump can't trust Congress. And just so you know, this has been edited into two parts for those of you listening.
Yeah, America can't afford to have 535 commanders in chief. When you take a look at how awful Congress has performed in terms of mortgaging our children's future, I certainly wouldn't want those 535 members calling the shots on this thing. So elections matter. Our Constitution produces one commander in chief.
Are you getting any briefings whatsoever, or are you learning about all of these strikes just in real time, like the rest of us are?
Yeah, I'm watching on the news, quite honestly. So I'm not I'm not on armed services. I'm not in those committees. I'm not in intel. Maybe they're getting more briefings. But again, this is something you really can't brief members of Congress because they'll leak it. And the element of surprise is crucial. I mean, can you imagine briefing members of Congress before the unbelievably successful operation in Venezuela? It would have been blown. We probably would have lost service members by doing that. So, no, you need the operational security. I don't trust members of Congress. I can understand why the commander-in-chief wouldn't either.
So first, Senator Johnson isn't exactly right on that. Yes, the American people do vote for a singular commander-in-chief, but the ability to go to war, to make war, is in the hands of those 535 members of the House and Senate, which we also vote for. That's part of their job. And like I said before, under the Constitution, the president is in charge of running a war, executing it as the chief executive, but it's Congress that says the U.S. is going to spend money to go to war. That's why they have the power to declare it or authorize it. Second, Johnson sits on the Budget Committee and the Homeland Security Committee. Now, normally senators on these committees have a lot of power to demand that they be brought in on military operations, at the very least after the fact. His job on those committees is oversight and approval of how the government works. And when he was asked if he and his colleagues should have more information to do that very vital job, the reason they're elected and that we send them into Washington in the first place, he said, no, we can't be trusted. Not trusted to keep Americans safe or that they might do the right thing, but they can't be trusted to stay loyal to the president, which is not their job. It's also, and Johnson would know this too, not enough under federal law for the president to withhold information about military operations from what's called the Gang of Eight, the highest-ranking members of the legislative branch, because the White House is worried about leaks. Federal law bars that outright. So the strikes in Iran have been happening, and they're unconstitutional. And they may also be war crimes, because the administration, through Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, said they're targeting civilian infrastructure like power plants and bridges, which, under the Geneva Convention, those constitute war crimes, even if they're considered dual use, meaning they're used by both military and civilians. I've talked about that before on here with experts like international law professor from Yale, Una Hathaway. When he was asked about all of this, here's how Hegseth responded.
Well, you just mentioned you're going to plan to hit them and strike them hard tonight. If the response is in hitting bridges, electrical infrastructure, how would that not be a war crime potentially targeting civilian infrastructure?
Well, it's precisely the kind of disingenuous question that I'm used to from the media, impugning the motives of the folks on our side who are incredibly professional and incredibly effective. We will hit them hard on our terms, on the targets that improve the environment for us to operate in and undermine the capabilities that Iran wants to have.
Important to note here, that was not an answer to that question, nor was it a denial. In fact, it was almost an acknowledgement that the U.S. would be carrying out these strikes on these targets because they fly in the face of what Hegseth has called in the past stupid rules of engagement. That's what he means by on our terms. I've written about this before, but Hegseth has a long history with war crimes and defending war criminals, so his answer here isn't all that surprising. What was surprising was that yesterday, in the middle of these strikes, Trump just announced that the U.S. had been undertaking a covert mission since last month to help get more than 100 million barrels of oil through the Strait of Hormuz during the blockades. That comes out to roughly 10 days of oil that comes through the Strait on average, And it's really not even enough to put a dent in global supply for a week. But Trump said on Truth Social that it was a sign the U.S. was in control of the Strait, specifically saying it's over for Iran. Maybe not. That's hard to tell. Right now, there are still around 265 ships stranded in the Strait, including 95 oil tankers. Trump's announcement came just a few minutes after he was asked about rising prices amid the war and inflation hitting 4.2%, the highest level since 2023, and this is what he said while seated in the Oval Office.
Sir, Mr. President, about the latest inflation number which came out this morning, could that be a
No, I love it. The numbers were great. You know what I really love? I love the inflation. You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. Do you know we've been taking out millions of barrels of oil? Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran, until right now. We took out the other night 22 ships. Late at night with no lights, because they don't have any radar, because we blasted the crap out of it. We took out, that's why oil's $85 a barrel. I mean, you take a look.
All right, so I love inflation is getting played everywhere right now, and while on its own it is a little out of context, even in context, it's not great if you're the president, nor if you're a Republican looking to get reelected. But the White House has been trying to spin this narrative that once the war is over, things will even out quickly, and prices, specifically oil and gas prices, will drop. Trump says at the end of that thing, they'll drop like a rock. So far, that is not what our own intelligence community thinks, nor what oil executives think. Just this morning, the Washington Post reported that oil executives had been trying to sound the alarm for the administration that oil prices are going to get a lot worse the longer the war lasts because of both oil shortages from the blockades in the Strait and that the U.S. has now been depleting our own oil levels to historic lows. That is a supply and demand problem waiting to happen. Econ 101 tells you when supply goes down and demand doesn't, prices go up. And that might be why this morning, as Americans were having breakfast, the president announced the U.S. will be hitting Iran, quote, very hard tonight, and then said, at some point in the not-too-distant future, we will be taking Kharg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets like Venezuela. That announcement came as maybe the biggest shock we've had in the war in a long time. Just as a real quick geography lesson here, Kharg Island is a small island off the southwest of Iran in the northern-ish end of the Persian Gulf. It's tiny, but it's a major oil port that can load up between 7 to 10 oil tankers a day. We are talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil a day from just this one port. So it is a major oil hub for Iran. But what it would take, what it would mean to take that island would be boots on the ground. And that's not me saying it, it's members of Congress and the Senate like Washington's Democratic Senator Patty Murray, who said invading Kharg Island would be an expansion of the war, adding, there is no objective, no exit strategy, and no end in sight. The moment we put American boots on the ground, we are sinking into a quagmire of Trump's own making. And Iran's lead negotiator agreed, saying on social media today that if the U.S. does this, it will explode energy infrastructure and markets and create an endless quagmire that you, the U.S., will be stuck in for years. Now, the administration has been planning something for the island for a long time, but it's viewed the island as an endgame scenario because it would be a massive escalation. There's no clear plan that we've seen, at least, about how many troops it would take to control Kharg Island, but the idea of putting boots on the ground of any kind is wildly unpopular. When Americans were asked back in March if they supported some kind of invasion of Iran, 55% said no. About a third said yes, but only special forces, and just 7% said yes to a large-scale invasion. Now, what that means to each person is going to be different, but at that time, the war was only a couple weeks old, and overall support for the war was only like -8 or 9. It wasn't even above 50%. But now it's at -20 to -21%, which is not great. So all that put together might be why just 6 hours after Trump said we were going to essentially invade part of Iran, he did another 180 on the war, posting this afternoon on Truth Social that the strikes he promised tonight had been canceled, saying discussions and final points, presumably on a peace deal, have been in both concept and great deal approved by all parties before he listed off a bunch of Middle Eastern and African countries, including Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and others, quote-unquote. Not on that list were Lebanon or Iran, central players in what would need to be a peace deal here. But Trump said, quote, time and place of the signing to be announced shortly. As I'm talking to you, the president has not announced that yet, when and where that would be, and by my count, this is the 39th time Trump has said a peace deal is ready to be signed since March. And every time he said that, it's turned out to be false. Iran has not commented on this deal that Trump has touted here, and given the track record, not just on Trump's side, but also on Iran's side, globally speaking, for outright lying, we have no way of knowing if any of this is true. What is true is that the war is now in its 15th week when we were promised 4 weeks. We are in day 103 of the war when we were promised 30. Donald Trump promised the American people that we would never be in another war under his watch. And now, there really is no clear end in sight. Okay, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show wherever you get your podcast. Like and subscribe if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. Where this week's original reporting is my conversation with Eric Zuliger, who is on the ground in Albania right now, covering the protests against the Kushner-Trump development plan for a brand new billionaire playground in protected wetlands. And Eric got his hands on some leaked materials that look like this plan might be a dry run for what the Kushners want to do with Gaza. He and I talked for almost an hour all about what he has been seeing while he's been on the ground there. It is a fascinating story. You can read the article, listen to the interview, and that's up for everybody right now, paid subscribers or not, because it is such a massive global story. And as always, share the show on social media. You can tag me at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky, and now on the Say So app. You'll be hearing me talk a lot about that more. It's a brand new partnership that I've got that is very exciting. And you can always find me on Instagram and TikTok at Grant_Hermes on those apps as well. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next time.